We're going to talk now on the bloodstream, which is the river of life. The bloodstream, to be perfect, has got to be that which will carry good food to the whole body and carry off the waste materials. This consists of the arteries, the veins, and the capillaries, and this covers not just a few feet of these, but it runs into miles, actually miles, of veins, arteries, and capillaries in each human being. But what do we do with them? Oh, we really foul them up. Those arteries and veins, arteriosclerosis, hardening of the arteries, this is sad that we haven't taken better care of this condition. We have in the arteries and veins tissue and cells that has to be kept alive and vibrant. This is done by proper feeding again. Improper is the killing of the very system itself. The very river is being plugged by improper feeding. Our biggest problem today is the use of sugars, refined sugars and starches, processed foods. It is causing hardening of the arteries. It is causing the arteries to be lined like your plumbing in the house gets to a point where there's only just dripping coming out of the tap. And you wonder, what in the world? So a plumber comes in and he cuts a section off of the pipe, and as you look inside of it, it's all corroded up with calcium. It's to a point where the water couldn't even get to the outside pipe, because it's running through a little channel that is built itself, layer upon layer. That's what we're doing with our arteries and veins right now, which makes it so that hardening of the arteries is one of our big killers. Using the sugar and the starches, which turn to sugar, we have here something that leaches out the calcium. And the first place it leaches out is in the artery and vein area, because this is one of the first places that it hits before it ever gets into the muscle tissue or into the bones. And so the veins and the arteries become weakened. They become so weakened that all of a sudden it feels like a bee sting, and we look down and it isn't a bee sting, one of the veins is broken. It has got to a point where it's like a balloon that's been blown up with a weak place on it, and that weak place can't take the pressure and it breaks. Enough of the veins break and we have varicosity that's severe, where we have varicose veins that can go into phlebitis. Phlebitis can go into more serious things such as gangrene. And when we get through with this whole story, you'll find that the arteries and veins must be kept in good condition. That's what we want to talk about now. Number one, we've got to keep them clean and keep away from cholesterol type foods and processed foods, hard water. Any water coming from the tap will do the same in your arteries as it's doing in your plumbing system in your house. The exact same thing. By the time a person reaches 70 years of age, they have had over 3,000 pounds of this material go through their body, solid calciums. And if you are able to throw them off, fine, but so many of us can't. And so it forms kidney stones, gallstones, arthritis, neuritis, bursitis, glaucoma, cataracts. The hardening of the arteries is, of course, one of the most serious parts of it. So we've got to do a job of rebuilding this system and cleaning it out. It can be done over a period of time with just cayenne alone. In my 20s and early 30s, no insurance company would take me, even for $1,000 policy. They weren't big enough gamblers to take me at that, because I had hardening of the arteries. Oh, I had a few other minor things, like born with arthritis and stomach ulcers and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But this was one thing that they hit hardest, was the fact that I had hardening of the arteries. And I started with cayenne when I was 35 years old. By the time I was 45, was 5 years past the time medical science had told me I was supposed to be dead. I was only supposed to live, if possible, after some of my accidents. If I could go to my 40th year, I'd be very fortunate. Otherwise, it would be very brief in a hospital bed or a wheelchair. But the hardening of the arteries was, by this time at 45, which was 5 years past the time, I was wondering how I was doing. Someone had bought one of my inventions, a group of fellows, and having not told them all the facts and everything because I wanted some protection myself, knowing my background, they were afraid that I would die before they got the results that they needed, and asked if I would go on a $100,000 policy. I was a gambler, and I said, well, yes. So that took 2 doctors with 4 examinations, 2 examinations apiece, scattered. One of them kept looking at my chart, and he looked up at me and said, is that right? You're 45 years of age? And I said, yes. Why? He said, well, you have the bloodstream of a 17-year-old boy. And I said, well, that's about right. I figured that's the way it should be. And the other one took my blood pressure 5 times. And I said, doesn't that thing work? And he said, why, it always has before, but it doesn't look like it's working with you because you're 45 and you have that shows a perfect systolic over your diastolic. Perfect. And he said, it couldn't be. And I says, well, it is. And he says, well, okay. I got a clean bill of health at 45 years of age. No hardening of the arteries. And we passed a $100,000 insurance examination. Of course, someone else was paying for the premiums, thank goodness. This sometimes is longer than we want to go. And so we'll go to other routines. At that time, I didn't know anything about distilled water, which is one of the most important things for hardening of the arteries. I didn't know about using shoulder stands or slant boards. I didn't know anything about this at all. I didn't know a thing about such herbal combinations as a blood purifying routine. But this is important. We, number one, to keep that bloodstream in good condition, as always, we go to our basics. A good mucusless diet, the cleanse regularly, and it's good to do that 3-day juice cleanse at least once a month, and then use a good blood purifying tea. Now there are a number of good teas that we can use. These particular teas, used singly, are excellent. Burdock root is for furunculosis, which the common term is boils. For boils, there is nothing better than burdock root tea. And for acne, it's good for arthritis. We have another herb that's very good as a blood purifier. It's called creosote bush. It's one of the chaparral family. As I've always said, anything that's that nasty has to be good. So we've got there something that's good for arthritis. It's good as a general blood purifying tea. We have many others, but I would like to go into a blood purifying tea that we thought we had an exclusive on. We'd use it for years. People with all types of malfunctions used it and got tremendous results with cancer and other things. And After a while, we found out that a person who had come back from a Hoxie clinic just to see how their cancer was coming along, they told us that at the Hoxie clinic, they were informed that our formula was almost identical to theirs. And we didn't even know they'd had it, and they didn't know I had it. Chief Sundance, Idaho Falls. When we were swapping herbal formulas, we found out that, again, we had the same formula again for our blood purifying. The good Lord had left it in a number of places because each of us have different types of people come to us. And this I was grateful for. But let me run down quickly what we have here. I won't go into the botanical names. I'll just go on to the herbs themselves. This is made up of red clover. The red clover is the blossom that we use. It's an alterative. It has many things that it is used for. We use that, though, in a large amount, 6 parts or more. The rest of the herbs are all single. And the next one is chaparral, once more. This has many advantages. It's a diuretic and an anti-arthritic. It's a detergent, an astringent. We go from chaparral into licorice root. Now, the licorice root works on the pituitary gland and the pineal gland. It aids many parts of the body, and so we're using the blood purifier in the gland area there. The poke root is quite an alterative, and it's a resolvent. It dissolves the calcified materials that are lining the arteries and veins. The peach bark is what we call a bitter tonic. Of course, all good tonics are bitter, but it has a laxative effect, and it is one of our choice herbs. But we now go into Oregon grape. The Oregon grape is to go in and do its job on the liver and gallbladder area and do a blood cleansing and purifying there. It's an alterative, and a hepatic. Being a hepatic is one that is specific for the liver and gallbladder area. Stillingia is a pure alterative herb. And prickly ash bark. Now, here we have one that is a stimulant, but it is also an aid for the cardiac, for the heart, and it assists the heart in being cleaned up. It works also as a tonic, as a nervine. Now we include burdock. Your burdock root is very high in copper, and it has a number of excellent things in, but it's a stomachic. It works to soothe the stomach and works on the cleaning of the bloodstream in that area. It is antiscorbutic, and it's a diuretic, works on the kidney and diuretic area. And our last one is called a buckthorn. This is a purgative, a diuretic, and a bitter tonic. Now, the reason we have collected these herbs together is because they work on purifying the bloodstream throughout the entire system. And this is the most important part. The blood being a carrier, it has to carry food into the various organs of the body and the bonal structure and even into the marrow of the bone. So it is just so important that we have a good operating bloodstream. In using this, sometimes we have to know first where the problem is. It might be in purifying the bloodstream, that it could be just a difficult condition in the bowels that need cleaning more than anything else. So we go right back to the beginning and start at the first, diet and everything. But here we have maybe just boils and acne that we would want to clean up in a hurry. So here we would go to either your combination, this group of herbs I just gave you, we call the red clover because it majors in the red clover. We would use that. Generally we figure a cup 3 times a day. That's 1 cup in the morning, maybe 1 at noon and 1 in the evening, or any way you wish to get the 3 cups down, but not all at once. That's 6 days a week for 6 weeks. Then we do recommend switching to another herbal tea for blood purifying for 6 weeks, and then come back maybe to your original red clover. For instance, you use red clover for 6 weeks, maybe you want to use Brigham tea, which is a wonderful blood purifier, and then back. Or you'll want to use burdock root, but stay with one type for a 6 weeks period to get the best results. If you were going to use burdock root, Dr. Shook, one of my teachers, was telling how that a young man came to him loaded with boils, and he'd had boils all his life. So he used burdock root, and it did the job. Cleaned up the boils and never had any more trouble. Sometimes, just to clean up the bloodstream, when I couldn't use boils, or use boils with a blood purifier to clean them, I had to use the regular procedure because I was in the Army at this time. We just would lance, tap, and drain boils, and that's a job I have never liked. And there were so many boils from so many fellows in the Army that we did a lot of lancing, tapping, and draining. A young fellow came in to me. He had boils all over his body, but he came with his arms spread out because he had a nest of boils under each arm and he couldn't lower them. Back of his neck looked like alligator hide because scar tissue on top of scar tissue. And I said, "How long have you had boils?" And he says, "Ever since I was a little baby." He said, "I've never been free of them." Well, I had lanced, tapped, and drained enough boils on him that day that I was fed up with it. And I said, "Soldier, how would you like to be through with boils for life?" "Oh," he said, "Doc, you're kidding me." And I said, "No, I'm not." "All right, I'll do anything you tell me." So I wrote him out a prescription. The prescription was not to the pharmacist. It was to the mess sergeant. We were living stateside, and he was to have nothing but fruits, vegetables, grains, nuts, and seeds. No fried foods, and plenty of liquid. And 3 months later, he had his first complete cleaning, and he'd never before in his life had been without boils on his body somewhere. And here, after 3 months, he had no more boils and was with us for a long period of time with no reoccurrence. All right, we did that without the herbs. Now, with the herbs, we'd have cleaned it a lot faster. To purify the bloodstream, sometimes we have to use an herb that's an affinitive, something that's very, very accurate in its work. Like with arthritis, here again, we use a lot of burdock root. When I was just coming out of the Army and starting practice, I used to weed gardens in the morning, daybreak, and I had made a little extra money while I was starting my practice. And the interesting part was that I insisted on taking the weeds along with me. And I had gathered enough burdock root that I was giving burdock root tea. We generally let it dry, but here I had an extremely bad case. A man had been in a wheelchair for a number of years, crippled up with arthritis. And I made him up quarts of fresh tea every day with the burdock root. And I had him drink it, quarts upon quarts. And I kept him on mostly liquid diet, but kept him on the mucusless diet. And before the year was out, this man was up walking around again, even though he'd been in a wheelchair for years. But the burdock root tea did this for him, a great blood purifier. Brigham tea is one of your greats for arthritis. You'll find most of your Brigham tea as a blood purifying herb grows over mining areas because it's high in copper. In the minerals that it has in it by an analytical checkup, we find that over 10% of the organic minerals are copper. Of the minerals that's in it, 10% is copper. All right, the copper, the live organic copper, when it's in a tea form, forms with the calcium in the body and starts to leach it off. The inorganic calcium deposits, like in the joints and the muscles. And this is an excellent tea. In case you don't know what Brigham tea is, it's also called ephedra. This dates clear back into China, thousands of years back, 4,000 or 5,000 years. It's also called Mormon tea. You don't have to be baptized to use it if you call it Mormon tea. But your Brigham tea is one of the common names. It's also called desert herb. But this is one of the fine herbs for arthritis. We now come to a point where we have blood poisoning. The blood is in a bad way, but it's in a specific area. And this blood poisoning can be a killer. We had a case come to us in Olympia, Washington. The man had his arm all swollen up with a red streak from under the armpit down into his hand, with a knob under his armpit about the size of a baseball. His arm was swollen about twice its size. I said, how comes you came to me? Why didn't you go to your regular family doctor? And he said, I have a friend who had this same problem, and he only has one arm now. And he says, I thought I'd try something else. I wanted to try your program. I said, all right. What had happened was he had cut his hand with a chisel a few days before. Not being able to take time off, he bound it up right tight with a dirty old rag and went on work. He got infection in it, and now he had blood poisoning. I took him out onto the front lawn and showed him some plantain, which is a very, very common herb. It's all over the world. It's in nearly everybody's lawn or grows wild. Plantain. Plantageous herb that I said, have you much of it in your yard? He says, oh, we've been digging it all the time. Can't get rid of it. And I said, wonderful. I'm glad you got plenty of it left. And I told him how to take it. Have his wife go out and take some plantain leaves, chop them up, bruise them, and put right over the wound where it was cut. Put it directly over it and keep it with a moist cloth over it. And I said, if it starts to dry out, put more leaves on it, but don't pull the old ones off, just put additional leaves on top of it and keep it stacked up, but keep it moist. He came back in about 3 days on his way to work to pay his office call, and his hand was completely healing. Just a very, very minor scar left, and that left completely without even a scar. This is blood poisoning. We've had so many, many, many cases of it. But that bloodstream, when it is in an area that is isolated like this, we need something of this type. Plantain, lilac leaves, which you'll find in no herb book, but it works the same as your plantain. There are many, many other of these herbs that are good. But for a bee sting, hornet, for mad dog bite, snake bite, your plantain is the thing that has saved many, many people. You bruise it up, make a tea of it as well, but bruise it up and put right over the wound and drink the tea. If you will get right to work at it, you can pull the poisons out so rapidly. We had a case of a little boy that had a bee sting. He'd passed out with it. His arm had swollen up, and the bee sting was right on the top of his hand. The plantain wasn't out, but I had some plantain ointment. I threw in my bag when I left on the house call, and I took a spatula and took about the amount that would fit on a silver dollar, if you know what a dollar is. They aren't around much anymore. I put it right over top of the bee sting, of the wound, and put gauze over it and wrapped it up lightly. And that was all there was to it. That afternoon, he was out playing, but they told me that within a matter of less than a half hour, the pain was all gone, and the swelling was started to go down. And it finally just left in a hurry, and that night he was playing with no problems at all. To have the good herbs that the Lord has given us, and have them in our own backyard, and have them where we can get them in case of emergency, is so important. As we go along on these tapes, we hope you get turned on so that you'll do a lot of research and learn which herbs in your own yard are so important. We've got, with the blood, now the key to being clear of all disease. When we once get the bloodstream clean with no bad bowel feeding into it. Over the years, for over 30 years, we have taught that cancer is not a localized, isolated condition that can be cut off any more than a boil is. If I had told that soldier, well, I've lanced, tapped, and drained your boils, you'll never have them anymore because I've got rid of them, he would laugh at me. He'd think I was stupid because he knows he's had boils all his life. So a cancer breaks out. A cancer breaks out someplace that has had an injury or damage, or maybe inside the body where we've had some accepted minerals. And the side effect and after effect have given us our big problem. So the cancer breaks out, but the cancer is in the bloodstream. But it is now accumulated like a boil or an ulcer in a specific area and has drained the poisons into this area, and so we cut it out. And we say, well, cancer's all gone. That is as ridiculous as saying the boils are all gone when we cut the boil away. So this is why that your cancer will break out in another place later on, and in another place, and finally death comes in. Because we've got to clean the bloodstream. Maybe you can understand now why I'm talking about a good, clean river of life, the bloodstream. Let's take time now for some questions, if we may.
When we alter the blood or use these alterative herbs, will that, now like the RH factor, these conditions of the blood, that possibly can change that condition. Is that right? Or
That's an excellent question, because we have so much problem with the RH, you know.
Yeah.
We had a perfect example of this in Brigham City. A lady came to our lectures there. She had had 3 children, and each of those children with the RH problem had to have the blood drained out of them and other people's blood pumped into them. She had a very severe condition of the RH problem, and she had also had open heart surgery. And so the doctor said, don't get pregnant. It would kill both you and the baby. Well, women are wonderful people. They ache for having another baby in their arms, as she did, and she wanted to have another baby. So she came to see if there was anything we could do. She said she'd heard of others that had been helped on our program. So we put her on the blood purifying routine, gave her, in addition, lots of red raspberry leaf tea to drink, and I'd forgotten all about the case, but we had her go on a mucusless diet and use the distilled water, follow right through. I was speaking in Pocatello, Idaho, a couple of years later, and a woman walked up to the podium and had the cutest little baby in her arm, and she said, "I wanted to show you the baby that we have had." That was this lady again. And she said, "This one did not have the blood drained out of it." And she said, "My RH factor is okay." And she said, "Even with open heart surgery, we had the baby." And well, here was a good solid example, and we've had many of them, many of these. So there is the key, the bloodstream.
Would you elaborate just a little on what happens to the body when you change the program? It like 6 weeks on one type of blood purifier and then alternate to another one.
The change is as good as a rest for some reason or other. It's like you may like spinach, but if you had spinach every day for a long period of time, you wouldn't like spinach any longer. Well, from the herbal formula that you're using as a blood purifier, the body's going to harvest a lot of good out of it. Now we'll switch over to another one, and it's still a blood purifier, but it'll have materials in it that are not in the first one maybe. And so we switch back and forth, and we find that we do get faster results this way, just as we do by not giving the formulas 7 days a week. I learned a lot from my patients. You know, I have always said 4% of what I know comes from the classroom. 96% comes from patients, from students, and the help of the Lord guiding us along. Well, here we had been using the herbal formulas 7 days a week, year in and year out. And then all of a sudden I realized the body needed a day of rest because it said so in the scriptures. So I thought, well, why not on the healing routine too? Just keep that same day. If it's going to be Wednesday for your day of rest, have it every Wednesday. If it's going to be Sunday, every Sunday. And I found that our patients got healed faster by going on a 6-day routine instead of a 7. And so we try to keep things to the 6. But your blood purifying teas really do better if you will alter them from time to time for this reason.
Now, in my own experience, we used carrot juice, a lot of carrot and celery juice, and then alternated to grape juice along with the herbs in capsule form. And in 4 months' time, there were, whereas they had told my father, just, get ready to die because you're 80 after all and you've lived a long life, and so you have cancers and you can't operate or there's no hope. But so we just used the carrot juice with a lot of celery in it, and then the herbs along with it, and then would change and use grape juice. It had to be pure.
Mm-hmm.
But those are also
Blood
good
purifiers.
herbs, aren't they? And
They are
blood
the
purifying
greatest.
herbs.
Yes. Well, what happened to your?
Well, in 4 months' time, they put him through the same series of tests and could not then find any cancer cells. And they didn't believe it was the same man because 2 different doctors took the tests. They still don't believe it, but it's true.
I like that. That's very refreshing. As far as juices are concerned, N.W. Walker is the man who really introduced juice therapy in America. And he believes in live food. And so N.W. Walker today is past 110 and as vigorous as any young fellow I've ever seen. And I talked to him not long ago. Oh, he's a jewel, and he does his own gardening. Right, but the juice is actually the bloodstream of the fruit or the vegetable. This is what it is. You're getting a blood transfusion from a fruit or a vegetable. And there is the key. But we do recommend, like in that little booklet, The Incurables, of staying with one type of a juice for a period of days.
Right.
And then switching to another type, not mixing them all during the day. Of course, with your vegetable juices, that's a different story. You can mix your celery with your carrot and put a little beet with it and things like this. This is all right. Mm-hmm. But stay with your vegetable juices for so many days. Then go to your fruit juices.
Right. That's what we did. It was like a 6-week period of time.
That's it. Yes.
Dr. Christopher, I have heard and observed in a small way myself a turning in the interest and in the openness of the medical profession. Many good friends of mine in the medical profession are coming up with a stronger interest in the natural ways now. Is this a general condition? Can you confirm this observation as being, you know?
Definitely so. When we started in with the teaching of herbs and the use of them well over 35 years ago, we were definitely a minority. I was the witch doctor and the oddball. I was it. And over these years, we have seen such amazing changes. But in the last 5 years, there have been more new books written on the holistic program than have been written in the last 100 years. In the last 5 years, many of those who did ridicule us in the past have climbed on the bandwagon and are good authors. Though they haven't practiced it, they have got some bestsellers because they see that the pendulum is swinging our way. And it definitely is swinging our way because our textbook, The School of Natural Healing, is now in hundreds of doctors, medical doctors' offices. And I have had as high as 5 and 6 and sometimes more medical doctors as well as naturopaths and chiropractors in my lecture groups. And it has been interesting to watch this because they are coming into the fact that there is a principle of working on the cause, not just working on the effect. And that is our whole secret and our whole principle. As naturopathic physicians, it used to be that we believed this way, but even some of ours of the naturopathic group pulled away from it and worked more on the effect and became more along the new trend. The trend that we are on dates back to Adam and a few worlds before that. This particular program, once again, is just doing everything that's good and nothing that's damaging to the human body. I'm so thrilled to see open-minded doctors coming our way from the orthodox field. And we have many of them now that believe as we do. And they are becoming a great aid because they are well educated and they are people that can be so beneficial to us. Dr. Kirchner is a very good example, an MD who came our way. He actually introduced comfrey to a lot of people who wouldn't have even said the word unless they were introduced properly. Well, they were introduced to it by an MD. And we have many of them that are doing these things now, and I'm grateful.
Dr. Christopher, speaking of the blood purifiers and the fact that you have mentioned grape juice, do you find that there would be any difficulty in a small child or an infant handling grape juice in case of emergency, in case the mother were not able to nurse that child? Would there be something better than grape juice?
Grape juice is one of the finest foods there is, actually. But a person must understand how to use it, because it must be chewed, as all juices should. Chewed sounds very crude and ridiculous, but it is swishing it in the mouth so that the saliva will mix with it. We have had cases with hypoglycemia, severe, with diabetes, severe, who have come to us and say, on your 3-day cleanse, we're afraid to try it because just a drink of juice will upset us, will throw us into problems. And I promise them, if you will chew that juice, and we have never had any problem with the people who will take the juice and chew it. This goes back to the old adage of drink your solids and chew your liquids. If you'll chew your solids thoroughly enough, masticate them and mix enough saliva with it, because the good Lord gives us 1.5 pints of saliva for each meal, and if we mix that with the food, then it'll be a liquid, and we'll drink our solids. And all of our juices we'll chew or swish it in our mouth. And that will give us better assimilation of our foods.
Will you explain why you suggest not diluting juices with water before we drink them?
You're diluting it with your saliva, and there is the key. You can, if you wish, dilute it with distilled water, but you're only getting half the potency.
If it seems too sweet.
If it seems too sweet, why,
Is there any?
yes, you can dilute it, but it's best to drink it straight. We have one thing about blood poisoning that's interesting. As we sit and write, sometimes we'll use a lead pencil, and the lead pencil has on the end of it an eraser. If we make a mistake, we can erase the mistake that we made. As we walk through the countryside, we sometimes will run into stinging nettle, into poison oak, poison ivy. And when we do, the good Lord has given us an eraser for that mistake. All we have to do is stop right there where we've been hit with one of these poisons and look around. And within view, and it never fails, within view, there will be either plantain, broad or narrow leaf. There will be hound's tongue. There will be mullein. If you're where there is some comfrey, any one of these, just take the leaf and rub over the area, and it neutralizes it right now and erases the problem.
I wish I'd known that.
I was surprised to find that I know that I'd heard you say this in the past, and so as we were, I work with the scout groups, and as we were hiking, of course the boys will do what they want to do a lot of times, whether what you tell them or not, and got into stinging nettle, and it was uncomfortable, and there was mullein right there, and there was hound's tongue right there.
Did you
But
use it?
I didn't know that hound's tongue would work that way, but I knew mullein would, and I used it, and he couldn't believe it. He thought, well, he just didn't get stung very bad after all.
Always an excuse, yeah.
Dr. Christopher, are there any identifying characteristics of hound's tongue for the average person to recognize?
Well, the best thing to do is we have a number of cards that have been made up.
Nature's medicine.
Nature's Medicine's Chest, and that is one of the finest ones. You've got the actual photographs and the pictures in color, and I have never seen anything quite equal, and I would get that. Or if you can't, get a copy of The Herbalist by Myers, or there are a few books, but sometimes we have to I have to find a book that is, well, let me put it this way. Potter's Topical Encyclopedia, this is what I'm trying to put over, has some herbs, for instance, like in England, your malva there is a different shaped leaf than it is here.
Yes.
And people get confused. So here's where you've got to understand that in different areas of the country, sometimes there's a little difference. But in the medicine chest, they'll give you enough